Good to see everybody. Let's turn to the book of Proverbs. Proverbs. We're going to read a couple of verses that we've read before. Proverbs chapter 4. We won't read all of the ones that we read there last week, but we'll read the couple that we read to kind of take the contrast we were discussing. Proverbs chapter 4, verse 18 says, "But the path of the just is as the shining light that shineth more and more unto the perfect day. The way of the wicked is as darkness. They know not at what they stumble." So for the last couple of weeks, we've been talking about the book of Proverbs and the different contrasts that it sets up. That it generally will often present in wisdom this concept of two different paths, two different ways of character, two different ways of deeds, two different paths that you can walk. And then it will tell you the outcome, some expected outcomes of pursuing those paths. And we've been talking about that. We started in Proverbs 29. We read last week in Proverbs chapter 4, talking a lot about those contrasts, those contrasting statements. Now, thus far, we've been dealing really generically. We've been looking a lot at some generic statements, things that we would just say, from a 50,000 foot view, we would call maybe right and wrong. That it's talked about the path of the just versus the path of the wicked. Another place we talked about the path of the righteous versus the way of the evil one. And so it's often, easy to wonder then, that seems so generic. What's that actually look like in practice? And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to kind of narrow it down. We'll use the book of Proverbs and we'll use the verses that specifically deal with contrasting two different ways or two different lines of thought and look at the wisdom that it develops in practicalities, okay? And just the practical contrast. We're not going so high this time to just be really super generic and say the good way versus the evil way, or the path of the just or the path of the wicked. Let's talk about some of the contrast that it does just from a strictly practical point of view. And so we're looking again just at the book of Proverbs. The help it is in wisdom in exploring two different paths that you have, the ability to pursue. You can walk path A, you can walk path B, and yet this book will set up some guidelines. Which way is considered the wise way? Which way produces which outcome? So what we're going to do tonight is we are going to look at the practical contrasts here in the book of Proverbs. Now, turn, if you will, to Proverbs chapter 12, and I'll try to explain how I want to develop this. Proverbs is full of practical information, right? So we're not trying to be super generic, and we're not going to go through every piece of practical wisdom that is in the book of Proverbs. You would have a lesson for every couple of verses. That's not what we're doing. We're going to take the verses where it contrasts ways. So this first thought, we're going to talk about our personal disciplines tonight, practical disciplines. The first one that we'll talk about is this idea of being teachable versus being a scorner or a scoffer. And when I do that, again, what I'm not looking to do is go through every single verse in the book of Proverbs that talks about the scorner. Not go through every verse in Proverbs that talks about the scoffer or the person that can't listen to rebuke, or otherwise the person that can, the person that does listen to reproof, the person that does engage and encounter the wisdom of others. But the contrast, verses that we can look at in the book of Proverbs that set us up with two different ways. So let's kind of talk about that. So the first idea would be that teachableness, that teachable attitude versus that of scorning or that of scoffing. Proverbs chapter 12, verse 1, it says, "Whoso loveth instruction loveth knowledge, but he that hateth reproof is brutish." What it does, and again in Proverbs 13, verse 1, "A wise son heareth his father's instruction, but a scorner heareth not rebuke." It sets up this idea and these contrasts that, okay, if we're going to talk about just this practical subject of whether somebody's teachable or not, whether somebody just has a teachable attitude, they'll listen, whether it be to rebuke or whether it be to instruction, or they'll take the opposite approach, right? They'll scorn at it, they'll scoff at it, they don't want to hear it. You and I both know people that you can't tell them that they're wrong. They just can't handle it. They won't listen to it. They don't take applause well, and they surely don't take criticism well. The Bible says, in comparing and contrasting these two individuals, first of all, it says that, this kind of speaks to their character. It tells us in Proverbs 12, verse 1, that one that loves instruction loves knowledge, and somebody that doesn't, he's brutish. The person that hates reproof is brutish. And yet, it would also say that those that hear their father's instruction, he's wise, as opposed to being a scorner that doesn't hear rebuke. Now, in setting up the contrast, not only does it tell you that these are kind of indicative of their character, but Proverbs will also tell us that there's a path that's right amongst those, and there's a path that's wrong. Look here in Proverbs chapter 10. Proverbs chapter 10. Proverbs 10, verse 17. Proverbs 10, verse 17. "He is in the way of life that keepeth instruction, but he that refuseth reproof erreth." Now, Solomon, in speaking to his son and setting up these two ideas of keeping instruction or refusing reproof, he feels comfortable saying one of these is right and one of these is wrong. The one that keeps instruction, he's in the way of life. He is actually setting himself up for success. The other way, he says, "He that refuseth reproof, he errs. He erreth." That's wrong. Now, let me take a pause here. I don't chase many rabbits, but I'll chase this one, okay? Some people are critical of the Bible, or the older Bibles like the King James Bible, because it uses verb endings like ETH, right? Erreth. Well, why doesn't it just say error? He that does this is an error. Why does it say erreth? That is a verb tense that we don't use in modern English. Those verbs that end in ETH often speak to a continuous action. So it's not just that if he doesn't listen to reproof or he refuses reproof, he's wrong. No, he continues to be wrong. He continues in that attitude. That is a wrong thing. It's wrong today. It'll be wrong tomorrow. And this is when he refuses reproof, this is going to be a continual and repetitive wrong. Okay? So as it establishes that, again, he speaks to the character of these two. He'll tell us that one is right and one is wrong. And let me show you the verses that actually tell us that each of these ways have an expected outcome. Proverbs 13. Proverbs chapter 13 and verse 18. Proverbs 13 verse 18 says, "Poverty and shame shall be to him that refuseth instruction, but he that regardeth reproof shall be honored." And so there he tells them all the things. He's contrasted this multiple times, but here he'll tell us that, okay, here's the two ways. One of them is definitely on the path to setting yourself up for success. The one that regards reproof, here's the outcome, shall be honored. Now I think about at home, with our family, when we talk to our children. I think about, criticism maybe that sometimes you get in the workplace. He that regardeth reproof shall be honored. People make mistakes, right? People make mistakes all the time, whether that's in a small local setting like a family, or in a larger setting like corporately or like at work. People make mistakes in every aspect of their lives at times. And sometimes they have to be critiqued on that. And sometimes they have to be challenged and told, hey, listen, this isn't the right way. You know what really speaks well to a person? You know what speaks well to their honor? When they regard reproof and they don't keep making the same mistake over and over again, right? It's not that this person wasn't worthy of reproof. There was a time when he had to be reproved. There was a time that he had to be corrected. And yet now, because he's regarded the reproof, he's spoken of as being someone who is honorable, as opposed to the one that refuseth instruction, that is now going to bring a shame upon himself. Not only will he not listen to the reproof, but if he's not going to listen to the reproof, it's obvious he's going to continue doing the same thing again and again and again. Proverbs 15 verse 32 says this. Proverbs 15 verse 32 says, he that refuseth instruction despiseth his own soul, but he that heareth reproof getteth understanding. So what we're doing, and just in this first point to kind of establish that this is how we're looking at the book of Proverbs in this study. There are any number of Proverbs that we could have looked at that talks about the scorner. And there's any number of Proverbs we could look at that talk about the need to listen to instruction. But all the verses that we've selected put those together, and they contrast those ideas that here you go. Which way you want? You want to listen to instruction? Because here's what that speaks. This is how that speaks of your character. You want to be a reproof? You want to be a reprover, or you want to be one that doesn't listen to reproof? That's the brutish character. And this person here has put himself in the way of life, and this person over here has put himself in the path of poverty and shame. And as he establishes these practical thoughts, right? We're not so high anymore. This is stuff that we all deal with. This is stuff that now gets down into the everyday aspects of life. Which path do I want to walk? Do I want to be someone that has a teachable spirit? Do I want to be someone that's, hey, I'm not always right. And there's times that I need critiqued. And I pray that if people come to me in criticism, that it's, with a good attitude on their part too. I pray that it's constructive. But when I'm worthy of criticism, when I'm worthy of reproof, there are two ways for me to respond. And Proverbs has showed me and told me how I respond is going to speak volumes about my own character and the path of success that I've set myself up on. One way is a very good way. One way's not. So that's the first idea. So teachableness, a teachable attitude versus that of a scorner or a scoffer. And there are a lot of ideas like this. Let's look at another one here. Proverbs chapter 10. Let's talk about diligence versus laziness. Okay? Diligence versus laziness. Now, just the way I say those words, you guys both know that one path is probably the right way, right? It's probably, we know what the words mean, right? We know how the terms are defined, so we know that one way is probably better than the other way. But in the practical things of everyday life, the book of Proverbs helps us to understand these two side by side and what they produce. Now again, I could go to Proverbs like, go to the ant, thou sluggard, and watch the ant. Or I could talk about verses just about the diligent. But let's look at the contrast. Proverbs chapter 10, verse 4. He becometh poor that dealeth with a slack hand, but the hand of the diligent maketh rich. He that gathereth in summer is a wise son, but he that sleepeth in harvest is a son that causeth shame. So there's the contrast. Those are the attitudes. Those are the paths that you can walk, and it starts to develop an outcome. Right? It starts to develop an outcome. Someone who's diligent, what is he doing? He makes rich. The one that gathers in summer, it speaks to his character. He's a wise son. The other son, the one that's slack or the one that sleeps in harvest, is a son that causes shame. Right? It would be, it would be embarrassing to my dad, who has worked from the time that he was a teenager and worked long hours for years and years and years, to have a son that's a bum and won't go to work. That's a shame, right? There's just not really any other way to describe it. If you've got a grown man that won't work, that's a shame. So it sets up this idea, this concept. Okay, now you can be lazy, you can sleep all summer, you can sleep during the harvest, or you can work, or you can be diligent. Here, those are your options. But with each one comes an expected outcome. In Proverbs chapter 13, in verse number 4, Proverbs 13, verse 4, it says, "The soul of the sluggard desireth nothing." The sluggard, he's always talking about what he wants, or maybe always what he's going to do. And yet, what does it say? The soul of the diligent shall be made fat. It's not just enough to be talking about it, right? It's not enough to desire. It set you up with two paths. We're not talking about what people want. We're not talking about the desire. We're talking about this is the sluggardly way. This is the path of laziness. Here's what it produces. Not much. Here's what the path of the diligent produces. It's a blessing. It produces enough. It produces a plenty many times. And so practically, we would look at the book of Proverbs and we can say that, of course, we could look and see it would be wrong. It's not a good idea. It's not a good testimony. It's not going to build you a good reputation to be lazy. You don't want to be somebody who's known as being lazy. You can get away with it a little bit more when you're a kid. But for the grown-ups that are in the room, it's not great to be lazy. And so, son, here's your paths. Pick which one, but choose wisely. Because if you walk this path, you're going to enjoy blessing. You're probably going to have enough, have plenty at times, probably even at times have more than you need. You walk this path, you're going to forever be talking about what you want, but what you don't have. And in the end, you're just going to end up being a shame. So just choose wisely, right? All right. Let's go to Proverbs chapter 14. Proverbs chapter 14. Let's talk about our temper versus a more patient approach to life, to circumstances, or to people. Now, notice again, it'll establish a contrast for us. Proverbs 14, verse 29. He that is slow to wrath is of great understanding, but he that is hasty of spirit exalteth folly. So again, that speaks to the character of the two. The person that is slow to wrath, he's got some things figured out, right? The person that is slow to wrath, he is of great understanding. He is wiser. He's figured some things out. Now, the one that is hasty of spirit, the one that can't control his temper, the one that's quick-tempered, the one that's doesn't have any control over that, what does it say? He exalteth folly. Now, you and I both know that some things are foolish, but we would never want it to be accused of us that we exalt folly, that we we put it on a pedestal, that's something that we pursue or that we admire. But actually, that's how the proverb describes the character of the one in setting up the contrast. This person here is of good understanding, the person that is slow to wrath. Now, the person that's quick to wrath, the person that's always hasty of spirit, this guy's pursuing folly. And likewise, in the next chapter, Proverbs 15, it does the same thing again. It tells us that there is an outcome to path A, and there's an outcome to path B. Temper versus patience. Proverbs 15, verse 18. A wrathful man stirreth up strife, but he that is slow to anger appeaseth strife. You ever notice that when you're quick to temper, you don't usually make things better? Because oftentimes what you'll find when you are quick to temper, when you quickly get mad, when you're just hasty of spirit and you don't take time to think things through, you don't take time to calm down, you will find that a lot of the things that you get mad about aren't the person's fault, or aren't the fault of the person that you're mad at. You'll find often, you'll go back and look at it once you have calmed down and realize, I think I got really mad about that, and I think it was an honest misunderstanding. You miss that. If you are quick to temper, if you are hasty of spirit, if you jump to anger, if you jump to a bad attitude at the drop of a hat, the Bible says, it paints the picture here that walking that path makes things worse. It stirs up strife. The one that is slow to anger appeaseth strife. So, again, in contrast, it's going to set you up with two ways. Now, which path do you want to walk in life? Do you want to walk the path that always stirs up strife or the path that makes it better? Well, we'd all honestly look at that, I think, and say, I want to be the kind of person that quiets or calms the room. I don't want to add to the trouble. I don't want to keep strife going. Well, then the answer would be, then you need to be on the path that is not quick to anger, that's quick to temper, that's wrathful, that's hasty of spirit. So it's happy to tell us, you can choose which attitude that you want, but no, these things are produced, right? Now, what you're finding is this, again, sometimes it's easier for us to just kind of talk in real generic terms, right? Right and wrong, evil versus just. But what does that look like? Well, Proverbs tells you. Let's get into your practical, your personal life. Here's some paths that you can choose. You can choose to be quick-tempered in life all the time. Here's what that produces. You can choose to be someone that's cautious and slow to anger. And here's what that produces. So think about that. And as you study through the book of Proverbs, we're going to look at a couple more of those, but I want you to consider those, right? There's a lot in this book that's practical and that it's helpful. And yet, one of the things that's helpful is that it'll often do that. It'll show you two compelling yet contrasting attitudes or options. You're free to choose whichever one you want, but choose wisely. All right, how about one for you kids here? Turn to Proverbs 11. I'm kidding, because this one's for the adults too. But we think about kids when we think about this one. It's almost always the analogies that we use. What about the talebearer versus the person, the gossiper, versus the one that exercises self-control? See, it's always easier to talk about this in light of the Bible talks about the talebearer. Let's talk about, tattling. Let's talk about, some of the obnoxious things that the kids get into at times. Well, I don't know that we want to talk about the gossiping part of it, right? That's that one's a little more practical for the adults. But notice how it sets it up. Proverbs 11, verse 13. A talebearer revealeth secrets, but he that is of a faithful spirit concealeth the matter. Now there's your two options, and yet which one you choose is indicative and speaks again to the character of the person. A talebearer is one that can't be trusted. He reveals secrets. He that is of a faithful spirit concealeth the matter. Now turn to chapter 17. Keep your mouth open all the time. Say everything that's not really your business to say, whether that be tattletaling or gossiping, or choosing to keep some things under your hat, realizing, not everything needs to be said. Those attitudes produce an outcome as well. Proverbs 17, verse 9. He that covereth a transgression seeketh love, but he that repeateth a matter separateth very friends. The two attitudes, the two paths, the two ways produce two different results. One produces the attitude that sparks friendship, is indicative of the love that this person has. The other one is, he says, it separateth very friends. And there are folks that because they can't keep their mouth shut, and because they have to repeat everything that they hear, and because they have to tell everything that they know, they have a hard time developing real, deep friendships and relationships with people. And why is that? Well, if you're going to tell everything I say to you, if you're going to repeat everything, I'm not going to tell you anything anymore. It doesn't mean that it doesn't mean I hate you. It doesn't mean that we can't be, acquaintances. It doesn't mean that we can't, have a relationship together. It doesn't mean that we can't go out to eat together and, shoot the breeze, talk about the weather or the Cardinals or something. But why would I tell you anything important if everything I've told you important so far, you've blabbed, right? You've had to share it. You've had to tell somebody else. And it says that there, that he that repeateth a matter separateth. Very friends. I mean, we're talking about real, true. So, tale-bearing, gossiping, the opening of the mouth versus self-control. Let me do just one or two more here. Turn to Proverbs chapter 11. What about greed versus generosity? Would you believe Proverbs sets these up? Same context, same verses. Proverbs 11, verse 24. Proverbs 11, verse 24. There is that scattereth and yet increaseth, and there is that withholdeth more than is meet, but it tendeth to poverty. The liberal soul shall be made fat, and he that watereth shall be watered also of himself. He that withholdeth corn, the people shall curse him, but blessing shall be upon the head of him that selleth it. There's this contrasting attitudes there, right, of greed versus generosity. And I cannot explain to you how it works that way, right? But there is something in God's economy that he has worked out that those that are generous and those that are greedy generally find themselves at the end at two way different ends of the spectrum. And it's not the one that you might think, right? The one that's greedy and the one that keeps everything stored up and the one that doesn't give and the one that holds everything for himself. he doesn't end up feeling fulfilled. He doesn't end up feeling happy and content and satisfied. The one that does, I can't explain that to you. There is that scattereth, yet increaseth, right? There's the liberal soul shall be made fat, and he that watereth shall be watered also himself. Here you've got the one that's of generous attitude, and here's what it produces. Certainly a lot more satisfaction. How could he be satisfied? How could he be happy? He's giving. He just seems to go beyond in his necessary generosity. And yet Solomon in his wisdom could say, sorry, son, that's just what I've seen. Right? This is the wisest man that lived, that is telling you from his experience and the things that he has learned, what he has seen. And things haven't changed much in 3,000 years, apparently, because this still seems to be the prevailing attitude. Greed doesn't generally make people contented and happy and satisfied. Generosity lends itself more toward that.
Are these the more educated people that do this?
I have seen some poor people and rich people. I have seen uneducated and educated, I think at both ends of each spectrum. I think it's just an indicative condition of man. Look here in Proverbs 21. Proverbs chapter 21. And again, these attitudes from the contrast are indicative of a character problem. And then we'll look at the outcome. Proverbs 21, verse 25 says, the desire of the slothful killeth him, for his hands refuseth to labor. He coveteth greedily all the day long, but the righteous giveth and spareth not. So there again, symptomatic of a character problem. And Proverbs 28, here's your outcome. Proverbs 28, verse 27, he that giveth unto the poor shall not lack, but he that hideth his eyes shall have many a curse. Son, you pick which one you want to be. You want to be greedy? Here's what that produces. Not a lasting sense of fulfillment. In fact, here, according to this, he that hideth his eyes shall have many a curse. We read about that he's cursed, he's hated. And yet the one that is generous of mind, heart, and with even his possessions, he that giveth unto the poor, he shall not lack. He has pictured in a much more fulfilled, beneficial, happy, contented lot in life. So son, again, to speak as Solomon would speak, here's what I've seen. Choose paths, but son, let me warn you, this is what I've seen at the end of each road. And there were others, right? We could talk. I don't have time tonight to get into all of the other ones. I had verses, where you could talk about the contrast between honesty and lying, the contrast between pride and humility. There's just verses after verses that aren't just random nuggets, right? Of here's a good attitude, here's a bad attitude. No, it's son, here are these two options. Here are these contrasting ways. Please choose wisely. Proverbs helps us because that's what it is. Again, we mentioned this at the beginning of the first lesson that we went through in Proverbs. When you go through this book, you're not talking about, it's not history, right? There's not a lot of historical information about people and individual events. It's not really doctrinal. It's not about establishing unwavering, unbending truths about certain subjects or topics in theology. This is the wisdom of a man that he is trying to impart both to his son and to any of us who would hear it and would listen. This wisdom comes from someone that had seen a lot. You read through the book of Ecclesiastes, and we went through that book in Sunday school here a year or two ago. Solomon had seen and done just about everything. In Solomon's pursuit of happiness, he did not withhold anything from himself. He tried it all. He searched it all. He's done just about everything. I think the wisdom comes from a standpoint that we could listen to, right? We don't have to necessarily try to pursue all that Solomon did to figure out if he's right about this or not. Son, here's what I've seen. Here are these paths. And hopefully these contrasts help us to choose wisely. So I encourage you again, as you're studying through the book of Proverbs at times, pick up on the nuggets, pick up on the character attributes, but next time you come across these things where it sets up these two opposites or these two varying ways, just chew on how many times it does that and how he's just being honest that here's what I've seen. Here are the paths of life. But son, here's what these produce. And, you know, in looking at the options tonight, at the beginning of the lesson, if I could have told you these were the points, you would have said it's better to be generous than be greedy. You would have said it's better to have self-control over your mouth than to be a talebearer or a gossiper. You would have said it's better to be diligent than lazy. You would have said it's better to be teachable than be a scorner or a scoffer. We would have known all of those things. And yet, these are the practical habits of wisdom that we need to monitor, that we need to work on. Because listen, I know that it's better to be teachable than to be a scorner and a scoffer. Don't ask me how I do with that, though, all the time, because that's a different story. I know which one's the right way, but now that I know which one's the right way, start to practice that, right? Start to do that. I hope those are helpful. Father, we're thankful to come tonight.